She was just a cook's assistant in a lonely frontier fort until one command changed everything. What she did next defied the expectations of her people and altered the lives of many, including her own. But why did she risk everything? For a man everyone called the enemy? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Davis as Sarah Miller wiped the sweat from her brow. It was the summer of 1857, and tensions between settlers and the Comanche tribe had reached a breaking point. Sarah, a young widow of 23, had been working as a cook's assistant at the fort for nearly a year after losing her husband to typhoid fever. "Sarah, stop daydreaming and get these meals ready." Mrs. Abernathy's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. The head cook was a stern woman with calloused hands and little patience for idleness. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, tucking a loose strand of auburn hair back under her bonnet. She returned to chopping carrots for the evening stew, the rhythmic sound of her knife against the wooden cutting board blending with the distant shouts of soldiers drilling in the yard. The fort had been buzzing with excitement since dawn when a patrol had returned with a Comanche prisoner. Sarah had caught only glimpses of the man, tall and proud despite his bound hands, as they dragged him to the holding cell near the commander's quarters. "Did you hear?" whispered Eliza, another kitchen helper, as she leaned close to Sarah. "They caught one of them Comanche warriors who's been raiding the settlements along the Pecos." Sarah merely nodded, keeping her head down. Unlike many at the fort, she didn't share the widespread hatred for the native tribes. Her father had been a trader who taught her that understanding, not fear, should guide their interactions with the indigenous peoples. The dinner bell rang, and the fort came, alive with hungry soldiers filing into the mess hall. Sarah served stew, avoiding the crude jokes and boasts about what should be done with their prisoner. As the evening wore on, Captain Wallace entered the kitchen, his weathered face grim beneath his thick mustache. "Mrs. Abernathy," he said, "I need someone to take food to the prisoner. Can't have him dying before we get information about his band's whereabouts." Mrs. Abernathy scanned the kitchen, her eyes settling on Sarah. "Miller, you'll do it. Take him some bread and water." "Nothing more," Sarah nodded, gathering a small wooden tray. As she turned to leave, the captain caught her arm. "And Miller," he added, his voice dropping to a whisper, "Colonel Harrison suggests you might add a little something extra to his water." He pressed a small vial into her palm. "Nothing fatal, just enough to loosen his tongue for questioning tomorrow." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what the captain was asking. The vial felt heavy in her hand, a physical weight to match the moral burden it represented. "Yes, sir," she replied automatically, her voice betraying nothing of the turmoil. Within, 2 guards escorted her to the cell, a small stone room with a single barred window. They unlocked the heavy door, and Sarah stepped inside, her heart pounding against her ribs. The Comanche warrior sat against the far wall, his dark eyes following her every move. Despite his bound hands and the bruises visible on his face, there was a dignity in his posture that struck Sarah deeply. "I've brought you some food," she said, though she knew he likely wouldn't understand English. The guards left them, standing just outside the door. "Don't get too close to the savage," one warned. "We'll be right here." When they were alone, Sarah set the tray down and glanced at the vial in her hand. The warrior watched her, his gaze unwavering. In that moment, something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of humanity that transcended language and the conflicts that divided their peoples. With a subtle movement, Sarah pocketed the vial and poured clean water from her pitcher into the cup. She broke the bread into smaller pieces, making it easier for him to eat with his bound hands. "My name is Sarah," she said softly, pointing to herself. The warrior studied her for a long moment before responding. "Tashunka." He nodded toward the water, thirst evident in his eyes. Sarah held the cup to his lips, allowing him to drink. His gratitude was evident in the slight nod he gave her afterward. As she prepared to leave, Tashunka spoke again, this time in halting English. "Why no poison?" he asked, surprising her with his understanding. Sarah froze, her eyes widening. "You understood what they wanted?" "I understand more than they think," he replied. "Why help enemy?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Because I don't believe treating cruelty with cruelty brings peace," she finally said. "And I don't believe you're my enemy." As the cell door closed behind her, Sarah knew she had made a decision that would change everything. The vial remained, hidden in her pocket, a secret that could cost her her place at the fort, or worse. Did he drink it? Captain Wallace asked when she returned to the kitchen. "Yes, sir," Sarah lied, her face betraying nothing. "He drank every drop." Dawn broke over Fort Davis, painting the sky in hues of amber and gold. Sarah had barely slept, her conscience wrestling with her deception and the knowledge that the morning would bring. Colonel Harrison's interrogation of Tashunka. She rose. Earlier than usual, hoping to intercept the prisoner's breakfast tray. The fort was already stirring with activity when shouting erupted from the direction of the cells. Sarah's heart leaped to her throat as she hurried toward the commotion. "Keeping to the shadows. The savage is gone," a soldier bellowed. "Sound the alarm." Captain Wallace emerged from the holding area, his face contorted with rage. How in God's name did he escape? Those restraints were secure. The guards stammered excuses about checking on him during the night, but Sarah knew the truth. Someone had helped Tashunka escape, and she had a sinking feeling about who that someone might be. Miller. Mrs. Abernathy's voice called out, "Where are you hiding, girl? There's work to be done regardless of this commotion." Sarah hurried back to the kitchen, trying to compose herself. As she entered, she noticed Lieutenant James Foster standing by the doorway. The young officer had always been kind to her, offering gentle words when others at the fort treated her with indifference after her husband's death. "Sarah," he said quietly as she passed, "a word, please." Her stomach clenched with fear as she followed him to a secluded corner of the yard. "I know what you did," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's face drained of color. "Lieutenant, No explanations needed," he interrupted, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I saw you return the vial to the medical supplies last night, and I was on guard duty when you brought the prisoner clean water a second time. Are you going to report me?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Lieutenant Foster's expression softened. "No, but Sarah, they're forming search parties. Colonel Harrison is convinced the Comanche had inside help, and it won't take long for them to question everyone who had contact with him." "Why are you warning me?" she asked. "Because what they asked you to do was wrong," he replied simply. "And because my father was like yours, a traitor who respected the native peoples. He taught me to judge a man by his actions, not his heritage." Plan began to form in Sarah's mind. "I need to leave the fort," she said, more to herself than to Foster. "Tonight," he agreed. "I'll be on gate duty. Come at midnight with whatever you can carry. I'll give you a head start before reporting your absence." The day passed in an agonizing crawl as Sarah went about her duties, preparing meals while search. Parties came and went, returning dusty and angry-handed. Colonel Harrison arrived at midday, his cold eyes scanning the fort's inhabitants with suspicion. "Someone here betrayed us," he announced during the evening meal. "And when I find out who helped that savage escape, they'll hang alongside him. When we catch him." Sarah felt eyes on her and turned to find Mrs. Abernathy watching her closely. The older woman's gaze held something Sarah couldn't quite decipher: suspicion, perhaps, but also something else. Understanding? As darkness fell, Sarah carefully packed a small bundle, a change of clothes, a water skin, some dried meat, and the few coins she'd saved. She tucked her husband's hunting knife into her boot and waited for the fort to quiet down at midnight. She slipped from her quarters and made her way to the east gate where Lieutenant Foster stood watch. "You have until dawn before I report you missing," he said, opening the small side door. "Head east toward the river. There's an abandoned trapper's cabin about 5 miles downstream. You might find it a good place to rest." "Thank you," Sarah whispered, clutching her bundle. "Be careful, Sarah. The wilderness shows no favorites, Comanche or settler." With a nod, she slipped through the gate and into the darkness beyond, the vast Texas landscape swallowing her small figure. The night air was cool against her skin as she picked her way carefully across the terrain. Guided only by starlight dot after an hour of walking, Sarah heard the faint sound of hoofbeats. She froze, diving behind a cluster of boulders as a rider approached. Her hand moved to the knife in her boot, heart pounding as the horse drew nearer. "Sarah Miller," a familiar voice called softly. "You helped Tashunka. Now Tashunka help you." She peered from her hiding place to see the Comanche warrior astride a paint horse, his silhouette unmistakable against the star-filled sky. "How did you know I would leave?" she asked, stepping into view. "I watched fort all day," he replied. "Saw soldiers angry. Knew you not safe." He extended his hand. "Come, not safe here. Patrols, search." Sarah hesitated only briefly before taking his hand and allowing him to pull her up behind him on the horse. As they rode east, away from Fort Davis and into the unknown, she felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. "Where are we going?" she asked, holding tightly to Tashunka's waist as the horse navigated the rugged terrain. "Safe place," he answered simply. "Where army not look." The night enveloped them as they rode farther from the fort and deeper into Comanche territory. Sarah knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She was now a fugitive, fleeing with a man her people considered an enemy. Yet as the miles passed beneath the horse's hooves, she couldn't help but feel she had made the right choice. For the first time since her husband's death, she was following her conscience rather than merely surviving. Dawn was breaking when they reached a secluded canyon. Tashunka led the horse down a narrow path to a small clearing beside a spring. 2 more Comanche warriors waited there, eyeing Sarah with open suspicion. "She friend," Tashunka explained in his native tongue. "She saved my life. The white soldiers will hunt her now as they hunt us." The older of the 2 warriors, his face lined with years of sun and wind, studied Sarah intently before nodding once. "Then she will ride with us until we reach the camp. The council will decide her fate." Sarah, understanding none of their exchange, dismounted shakily, her legs stiff from the long ride. "Rest now," Tashunka told her in English, gesturing to a place near the spring. "Soon we ride again." As she sank to the ground, exhaustion overtaking her, Sarah wondered what future awaited her. She had thrown away everything familiar for a principle, for a moment of human connection across a divide of hatred and misunderstanding. Whatever came next, she knew she would face it with the same courage that had led her to defy Colonel Harrison and help a man society had taught her to fear. 3 days of hard riding brought Sarah and her Comanche companions to a hidden valley nestled between 2 rocky ridges. The journey had been grueling, with brief stops only to rest the horses and take shelter during the hottest part of each day. Throughout their travels, Tashunka had taught Sarah basic phrases in the Comanche language, and she had shared with him stories of her life before Fort Davis. As they crested the final hill, Sarah gasped at the sight below. A Comanche camp of perhaps 30 tipis stood along the meandering stream, with horses grazing in a natural corral formed by the valley walls. Women worked at tanning hides or tending cooking fires, while children played games among the dwellings. "Your people," Sarah murmured, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. Tashunka nodded. "My band, Quahati Comanche." He pointed to the largest tipi near the center of the camp. "Chief Pita Nokona. He decide your fate. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Women gathered their children, men reached for weapons, and all eyes fixed on the white woman riding behind Tashunka. Sarah felt naked under their collective gaze, understanding for the first time what it meant to be the outsider, the other. A tall, imposing man emerged from the central tipi. Even without Tashunka's respectful nod, Sarah would have recognized him as the chief. He carried himself with unmistakable authority, his face weathered but his eyes sharp and alert. Chief Nokona spoke rapidly in Comanche, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent camp. Tashunka replied, occasionally gesturing toward Sarah. She caught her name and Fort Davis among the unfamiliar words. Finally, the chief approached her, studying her face as though reading a map. "Why you help my warrior?" he asked in heavily accented English. Sarah swallowed hard before answering. "Because what they wanted me to do was wrong. And because I saw him as a man, not an enemy." The chief considered her words, his expression revealing nothing. Many white eyes say good words, few show good hearts. He turned to an older woman who had joined him. "Take her to Empty Moon's tipi. She stay there until council decides." The woman, her face deeply lined but her eyes kind, beckoned to Sarah. "Come, white sister, you must be tired and hungry." Sarah followed her through the camp, acutely aware of the stares following their progress. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, and warriors watched with undisguised suspicion. Empty Moon's tipi was small but well kept, with furs covering the ground and cooking implements arranged neatly near a central fire pit. The old woman offered Sarah a wooden bowl of stew, a mixture of meat and wild onions that smelled better than anything she'd eaten in days. "Thank you," Sarah said in Comanche, using one of the phrases Tashunka had taught her. Empty Moon smiled, revealing missing teeth. "Tashunka teaches you our words. Good. To understand a people, you must speak their language." As Sarah ate, Empty Moon explained that she was a widow whose sons had been killed in battles with white settlers. "Now I am called Empty Moon because my light is gone," she said matter-of-factly. "But I still have uses. I heal the sick. I tell the old stories to the children." "Why are you being kind to me?" Sarah asked. "Because Tashunka says you have a good heart," the old woman replied. "And because I am curious about a white woman who would betray her people to save one of ours." "I didn't betray my people," Sarah said firmly. "I refuse to betray my own conscience." Empty Moon nodded thoughtfully. "Sleep now. Council meets when the sun touches the western ridge." Sarah must have dozed off, for she woke to Tashunka's voice calling from outside the tipi. "Sarah, Chief calls for you." The council fire burned bright in the gathering dusk, illuminating the faces of 12 men seated in a semicircle. Chief Nokona motioned for Sarah to sit across from them, with Tashunka beside her to translate. For nearly an hour, they questioned her about her life, about Fort Davis, about why she had helped Tashunka. Some of the warriors were openly hostile, arguing in Comanche that she could be a spy, or that she would bring soldiers down upon them. "Tell them I understand their distrust," Sarah said to Tashunka. "My people have given them many reasons to fear and hate us. But I am not here to harm anyone. I only want to find a place where I can live according to my conscience." As Tashunka translated her words, Sarah noticed a shift in some of the warriors' expressions, not acceptance, but perhaps a grudging respect for her honesty. "Finally, Chief." Nokona raised his hand for silence. "The council has heard enough," he announced. "The white woman Sarah will stay with us until the next moon. She will work with the women, learn our ways. Then we will decide again." It was neither acceptance nor rejection, but a chance, a precious opportunity to prove herself. Sarah bowed her head in gratitude. As the council dispersed, one of the warriors approached her, his face scarred from battle and his expression hostile. "My brother died by white man's bullet," he said in broken English. "His children have no father. Why should you live when he does not?" Before Sarah could respond, Tashunka stepped between them. "She is not the one who killed your brother, Red Wolf. She saved my life when her people would have taken it." Red Wolf spat on the ground. "One good deed does not wash away the blood of generations." He stalked away, leaving Sarah shaken. "Do not fear him," Tashunka said. "He speaks from pain, but he will obey the chief's decision." Over the following days, Sarah worked alongside the Comanche women, learning to tan hides, gather wild foods, and cook in their tradition. Empty Moon became her teacher and protector, patiently correcting her mistakes and defending her from the occasional hostile remark. The children were the first to accept her, initially watching from a distance, but gradually drawing closer, curious about her different appearance and amused by her clumsy attempts to learn their games and crafts. One evening, as Sarah sat outside Empty Moon's tipi, mending a torn dress, a small girl approached, holding out a crudely made doll. "For you," the child said shyly in Comanche, "to keep bad dreams away." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the gift. "Thank you," she replied, her pronunciation careful. The girl smiled and scampered away, but the interaction had been observed by others in the camp. Slowly, day by day, the invisible barrier between Sarah and the Quahati began to thin. Tashunka visited her often, sometimes bringing small gifts, a handful of berries, a pretty stone from the stream, and continuing her language lessons. Sarah found herself looking forward to these visits, drawn to his quiet strength and the way he bridged the worlds they each came from. "Tomorrow I ride with hunting party," he told her one evening. "First hunt since capture." "Be careful," Sarah sighed, surprising herself with the depth of her concern. Tashunka studied her face in the fading light. "You worry for me?" "Yes," she admitted. "I do." He reached out, briefly touching her hand, the first such contact between them. "I return. We talk more of your world, of mine. Perhaps find place between." As he walked away, Sarah realized with a start that she was developing feelings for this man from a culture so different from her own. It was unexpected, perhaps unwise, but undeniable. That night, as she lay in Empty Moon's tipi, listening to the old woman's soft snores, Sarah contemplated the strange path her life had taken. From Fort Cook to fugitive to this living among people who had every reason to consider her an enemy. Yet somewhere in this journey, she had found something she'd thought lost forever after her husband's death: purpose, and the first tentative shoots of belonging. The hunting party had been gone for 3 days when the lookouts gave the alarm. Sarah was grinding corn with Empty Moon when the cry went up: "Soldiers, blue coats coming from the east." The camp erupted into controlled chaos. Warriors grabbed weapons, women hurriedly packed essential items, and children were gathered in the center of the camp. Chief Nokona strode among them, issuing calm, clear orders. "How many?" he demanded of the breathless young scout. 2 hands of mounted soldiers." The boy replied, holding up 10 fingers. "And trackers, they follow our hunting party's trail." Sarah's heart sank. The hunting party, including Tashunka, was returning from the east. They would ride straight into the soldiers. "Chief Nokona," she said, approaching him with determination, "let me help. I know how these soldiers think, how they operate." The chief regarded her skeptically. "Why would you help us against your own kind?" "Because this is wrong," Sarah replied firmly. "They're invading your territory, hunting people who've done nothing to provoke this attack. And because—" she hesitated, then continued with conviction, "because these past weeks, your people have shown me more humanity than I found at that fort." After a moment's consideration, Nokona nodded. "Speak your thoughts. The soldiers will expect you to." "Flee west, deeper into Comanche territory," Sarah explained. "But if you instead circle north around that ridge and then east, you can warn the hunting party and escape into the broken country near the river. Soldiers won't follow you there. Their horses aren't trained for that terrain. The chief's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. And what of you, white woman? Will you run to the soldiers and tell them our direction? No, Sarah said without hesitation. I'll go with Empty Moon and the others. My place is here now. Something shifted in Nokona's expression, a newfound respect. He turned to his warriors and issued rapid orders in Comanche. Within an hour, the camp had disappeared, Tippis dismantled and packed onto travois pulled by horses. The band moved silently north, skirting the ridge as Sarah had suggested. 2 young warriors were sent ahead to intercept and warn the returning hunting party. As they traveled, Empty Moon kept close to Sarah. You chose us, the old woman said simply. Now you are truly of the people. By nightfall, they had reached a sheltered valley where several small caves offered protection. Scouts reported that the soldiers had indeed followed the false trail west before realizing their mistake. Sarah sat near a small shielded fire, anxiety gnawing at her as she thought of Tashunka and the others from the hunting party. Had the warning reached them in time? Her question was answered shortly before midnight when silent figures materialized from the darkness, the hunting party, laden with game but unharmed. Sarah's eyes searched for and found Tashunka, relief washing over her at the sight of him. He approached her directly, his expression grave. The soldiers who hunt us, they are from Fort Davis. Sarah nodded. I expected as much. Colonel Harrison wouldn't give up easily. One soldier I captured before killing, Tashunka continued. He say they hunt not just for Comanche, but for white woman traitor, for you. A cold weight settled in Sarah's stomach. They won't stop looking, will they? No, Tashunka sat beside her. Harrison is like wolf with scent of blood. He follows until he finds prey or dies trying. Chief Nokona joined them, having overheard their conversation. This changes our path, he said. We cannot stay in these hunting grounds with soldiers searching. We must go north to join with Buffalo Hump's band for winter. I've brought this danger to your people, Sarah said, guilt washing over her. Perhaps I should. No, Tashunka interrupted forcefully. You not give yourself to them. They kill you for helping me escape. The chief studied both their faces. In the firelight, Tashunka speaks truth. But there is another way, he turned to Sarah. Among our people, when a woman is taken captive but proves herself worthy, she may be adopted into the tribe. No longer enemy, but one of us. Sarah's breath caught. You would do this for me? It is not done lightly, Nokona warned. You must give up your old life completely. Learn our ways, our beliefs. Become Comanche in your heart. I've already left my old life behind, Sarah said quietly. When I gave Tashunka water instead of poison, I chose a different path. The chief nodded. Then tomorrow, before we journey north, you will be reborn as one of the people. The ceremony took place at dawn. The entire band gathered in a circle as Empty Moon prepared Sarah, painting symbols on her face and hands with red ochre, and tying small feathers into her hair. These marks tell your story, the old woman explained. This one speaks of courage. This one of compassion. This one of the journey between worlds. Chief Nokona led Sarah to the center of the circle, where a small fire burned. In his hand, he held a knife. Blood makes family, he said for all to hear. Today, this woman's blood will mix with the blood of the people, and she will be Comanche. He made a small cut on his palm, then motioned for Sarah to extend her hand. The knife's sting was brief as he drew it across her palm. Taking her bleeding hand in his, Nokona pressed their wounds together. From this day forward, you are Quine Pikotsu woman who shows mercy, he proclaimed. The enemies of the Comanche are your enemies. The friends of the Comanche are your friends. The land of the Comanche is your land. The band called out in approval, and Empty Moon wrapped a Comanche dress of soft deerskin around Sarah's shoulders, replacing her tattered settler's clothing. As the ceremony concluded, Tashunka approached her, his expression solemn but his eyes warm. "Now you are of my people," he said. "Would you also be of my tipi? Would you walk the path of life beside me, Quinai Pakatsu?" Sarah, now Queenie, felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. In this man she had found not just a reason to leave her old life behind, but a reason to embrace a new one. "Yes," she replied, both in English and then in Comanche. "I will walk beside you." Their union was blessed by the chief that same day. A simple ceremony of joined hands and shared vows before the band began their journey northward. As they rode away from the hunting grounds, Sarah looked back once at the distant smudge on the horizon that marked Fort Davis. She thought of Lieutenant Foster, hoping he had not suffered for helping her escape. She thought of the life she might have led had she followed orders and poisoned the Comanche prisoner. Then she turned her gaze forward, toward the endless plains stretching before them. Beside her rode Tashunka, a man from a world she had been taught to fear but had instead come to love. Around her traveled her new family, people who had taken her in despite every reason to reject her, the choice she had made that day in the prison cell, to give water instead of poison, mercy instead of cruelty, had altered the course of not just one life, but many. In refusing to be an instrument of hatred, she had found a path to belonging that she had never imagined possible. As the band disappeared into the northern horizon, the legend of Quinai Pakotsu, the white woman who became Comanche, was just beginning. It would be told around campfires for generations, a story of courage, compassion, and the power of seeing the humanity in those we are taught to call enemy.